There was blood on the floor of Untermyer Park long before the famous .44 caliber revolver ever echoed through the streets of Queens. The Son of Sam was a heavily armed, highly organized, violent network operating out of Yonkers, connected to a nationwide occult syndicate specializing in ritualistic execution, snuff films, and murder for hire. There was a slaughterhouse hidden within the overgrown, decaying foliage of Yonkers, New York. Night shift workers at the neighboring St. John's Hospital reported seeing torch flames moving deep within the woods, accompanied by the low cadence of chanting. Locals called the abandoned pump house the Devil's Cave. The Yonkers police filed reports and looked away. On August 10, 1977, the New York Police Department arrested a 24-year-old postal worker named David Berkowitz. Detective John Falatico led the early morning stakeout outside of Berkowitz's apartment at 35th Street in Yonkers. Berkowitz sat behind the wheel of a car, surrounded by law enforcement. Underneath the driver's seat was a .44 special caliber revolver, maps of the crime scenes, a rifle, a duffel bag, heavily stocked with ammunition. Berkowitz was arrested due to a parking ticket issued outside the scene of the final shooting in Brooklyn, tipped off by a local witness named Casalia Davis who walked past the suspect's car. When he was in police custody, Berkowitz offered a confession. He claimed he was acting on the orders of a 6,000-year-old demon that possessed a black Labrador retriever named Harvey. Harvey belonged to Berkowitz's neighbor, a 64-year-old answering service operator named Sam Carr. The New York police was exhausted by the largest manhunt in the city's history, so they closed the case. The official narrative concluded that the Phantom of the Bronx was a lone delusional gunman acting by himself. The forensic evidence and the eyewitness sketches say something different about that official conclusion. The facts, according to the NYPD's own files, show that David Berkowitz lacked the ability to commit all of the shootings alone. When detectives closed the file on David Berkowitz, they left the network intact. To keep the lone gun theory going, law enforcement ignored the physical contradictions provided by surviving victims and eyewitnesses. Berkowitz was a stocky, dark-haired man standing roughly 5 feet 8 inches tall with a round face and a heavy build. The individual pulled a trigger across the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, changed height, weight, hair color, and vocal pitch from one shooting to the next. The timeline of the attacks shows a cast of triggermen who all used the same weapon to execute randomized targets. On July 29, 1976, 18-year-old emergency medical technician Donna Loria and 19-year-old nurse Jody Valenti sat in a double-parked Oldsmobile on Burr Avenue outside of the Burr Arms building in Bronx. A man approached the vehicle carrying a paper bag. He crouched, braced his elbow on his knee, and aimed a weapon with a two-handed grip and fired. Loria died instantly from a gunshot wound to the neck. Valenti took a bullet to the thigh. Valenti described a 200-pound shooter with short, dark, curly hair. Neighbors corroborated the presence of an unfamiliar yellow compact car cruising the area prior to the attack. The description sounded like Berkowitz. 4 months later, the description of the killer changed. After midnight on November 27, 1976, 16-year-old Donna DeMacy and 18-year-old Joanne Lamino sat on the porch of Lamino's home in Floral Park, Queens. A man dressed in military fatigues approached the porch and asked for directions in a high-pitched voice. He then pulled out a revolver and fired. The sketch from the surviving victims and neighboring witnesses showed a man who stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed 150 pounds, and had straight blonde hair. It's impossible for a 200-pound dark-haired man to transform into a 150-pound blonde man. NYPD officials acknowledged this reality. Sergeant Richard Conlon stated on the record that police were looking for multiple suspects, noting the release of the different sketches for the black-haired Loria Valenti suspect and the blonde Lamina DeMasi suspect. Yet, after Berkowitz was arrested in August 1977, the department made the single suspect fit the entire timeline of crimes, burying the DeMasi-Lamino sketch in the archives. The final shooting occurred on July 31st, 1977. Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violenti sat in Violenti's 1968 Buick Skylark near a Lover's Lane in Bath Beach, Brooklyn. Someone fired a .44 caliber slug through the passenger windows, destroying Valenti's left eye and tearing across his skull. Moskowitz died from a gunshot wound to the head. An eyewitness identified only as Tommy Z was parked directly in front of Valenti's car and watched the gunman approach in his rearview mirror, providing the police with yet another physical description that didn't sound like David Berkowitz. The blonde sketch from the November 27th shooting was an exact match for John Carr, the son of Berkowitz's neighbor, Sam Carr. Berkowitz lived on the 6th floor of 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. Sam Carr had two sons, John, a tall, slender, blonde man who was a diagnosed schizophrenic and heavy drug user, and Michael, who was dark-haired and stocky. John Carr went by the local nickname Wheaties. There were disagreements between Berkowitz and Carr that would escalate in early 1976 when Berkowitz threw a Molotov cocktail at Sam Carr's house in a failed arson attempt, and later shot Carr's black Labrador Retriever, Harvey, with a .44 caliber weapon. Berkowitz told the police and the press about his accomplices. He hid their names within the psychotic rambling of the Son of Sam letter. On April 17, 1977, after the murders of Alexander Esau and Valentina Suriani, police found a handwritten letter at the crime scene. The letter taunted the NYPD directly. "I'm the son of Sam. I'm a little brat. Sam loves to drink blood, go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Beyond our house, some rest, mostly young, their blood drained, just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic too. I can't get out. I'm on a different wavelength than anyone else, programmed to kill. I am the monster, Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth." 1 month later, Berkowitz mailed a second letter to Jimmy Breslin, who was a columnist for the New York Daily News. The envelope was postmarked from New Jersey. The text contained explicit references to the Yonkers cult. "Mr. Breslin, sir, don't think because you haven't heard from me for a while that I went to sleep. No, rather, I am still here, like a spirit roaming in the night. Thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam, the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell, John Wheaties, and suffocator of young girls." John Wheaties was a reference to John Carr. The 22 Disciples of Hell was the name of the satanic cell operating out of Untermyer Park, a group that Berkowitz and the Carr brothers belonged to. The NYPD ignored the names in the letters, reading the text as the hallucinations of a lone, insane person. 16 years after his arrest, Berkowitz sat for a prison interview with journalist Maury Terry. During the conversation, Berkowitz named both Michael and John Carr as triggerman in the .44 caliber murders. Berkowitz stated on camera that John Carr committed the November 27th shooting in Floral Park, which of course perfectly matched the blonde 150-pound sketch from the Lamino Damasi crime scene. Berkowitz confirmed that Michael Carr was the gunman responsible for the June 26, 1907 shooting at Elfa's Discotheque in Bayside, Queens, which left Judy Placido and Sal Lupo wounded. The network shared the Charter Arms Bulldog, rotating the weapon among the cult members to execute randomized murders dictated by the group. As Berkowitz sat in the Sullivan Correctional Facility, the remaining members of the 22 Disciples of Hell initiated a cleanup operation. The terror of the conspiracy is the network's efficiency in silencing its own members. Both John and Michael Carr met very violent, suspicious ends within 26 months of Berkowitz's arrest. Following Berkowitz's arrest, John Carr fled New York and relocated to an Air Force base in Ward County, North Dakota. On February 17, 1978, John Carr was found dead inside his girlfriend's home on the military base. He had suffered a rifle shot to the face. Local authorities labeled the death a self-unaliving. The angle of the weapon and the realities of the crime scene eventually forced the Ward County Sheriff's Department to revise the official finding to probable homicide. Berkowitz later confirmed from prison that John Carr's death was an execution carried out by members of the cult. Carr's heavy drug use and erratic schizophrenic behavior made him a massive liability to the network. Michael Carr did not survive the next year. On October 4th, 1979, Michael Carr died in a violent single-car accident on Manhattan's West Side Highway. The crash was blamed on drunk driving. Berkowitz would claim that staging a fatal car crash was standard procedure for eliminating compromised members of the cult. With both Carr brothers dead, the Yonkers cell severed the direct links between Berkowitz and the broader network, insulating the hierarchy of the cult from law enforcement. The police refused to investigate the connections, treating the deaths as convenient coincidences. Journalist Maury Terry refused to accept the NYPD's lone gunman story. Terry spent decades compiling a staggering amount of evidence published in his 1987 book, The Ultimate Evil. Terry mapped the structure of the Children, the Yonkers-based satanic cult operating out of the Untermyer Park aqueducts. Terry traced the origins of the Yonkers cell to the Process Church of the Final Judgment. It was founded in London in 1966 by Robert de Grimston and Mary Ann Macklin. The group would relocate several times in the 60s and 70s, establishing chapters in Mexico, New Orleans, San Francisco, and New York. Process Church leaders wore dark, ankle-length capes and modified crucifixes featuring snake imagery. The Process Church had a highly secretive structure and would be involved with some of the most notorious criminal entities of the 20th century. The group maintained a chapter house in San Francisco just blocks away from Charles Manson's residence in early 1967. In 1971, the group published a death issue of their official magazine, featuring an exclusive interview with Manson conducted from his prison cell. Berkowitz and the Carr brothers were initiated into the localized splinter of this national network. The 22 Disciples of Hell conducted blood rituals in the Devil's Cave, harming animals as primary blood sacrifices before escalating to human targets and parked cars across the 5 boroughs. The .44 caliber murders were direct directed by the cult's hierarchy. They were not the random urges of a psychotic postal worker. The reach of the network extended far beyond the borders of New York, connecting the Son of Sam shooters to a ritualistic murder executed on the West Coast 3 years prior to Berkowitz's arrest. Arlis Perry, a 19-year-old woman from Bismarck, North Dakota, moved to California in August 1974 with her husband Bruce Perry, a second-year pre-med student at Stanford University. Prior to leaving North Dakota, Arlis engaged in a religious campaign, actively attempting to convert members of a satanic cult operating in Mandan, North Dakota to Christianity. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on the night of October 12, 1974, Arlis and Bruce argued about the tire pressure of their car while walking on the Stanford campus. Following the dispute, Arlis told her husband she wanted to pray alone. She entered the Stanford Memorial Church, and she would never leave. Bruce Perry called the Stanford police at 3 a.m. to report his wife missing. Officers from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office arrived at the church and reported all outer doors were locked. At 5:45 a.m., Stephen Crawford, a campus security guard and former Stanford police officer, unlocked the building and reported finding her body in the church near the altar. The crime scene was ritualistic staging. Arlis Perry lay face up, her hands folded across her chest, and she had been brutally beaten and strangled. An ice pick had been driven directly through the back of her skull. She was nude from the waist down. The killers had assaulted her with an altar candle. A massive altar candle was placed between her breasts. Her denim jeans were arranged across her legs in a diamond pattern, a specific Masonic and mystical formation. Detectives would recover semen on a kneeling pillow near the body and a partial palm print on one of the candles. The investigation stalled due to a lack of matches. Bruce Perry was briefly considered a suspect before being cleared. The link to the Son of Sam network came out when David Berkowitz began corresponding with law enforcement in North Dakota. Berkowitz mailed a book called Anatomy of Witchcraft to Lieutenant Terry Gardner of the Ward County Sheriff's Department. Inside the margins of the book, Berkowitz had written, Arlis Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University. Berkowitz had insider knowledge of a cold case ritual murder committed 3,000 miles away. For 44 years, the Arlis Perry murder remained unsolved. On June 28, 2018, DNA testing matched the semen on the kneeling pillow to the security guard who found the body, Stephen Crawford. Santa Clara County deputies arrived at Crawford's residence on Camden Avenue in San Jose to execute an arrest warrant. Before the officers could break down the door, Crawford retrieved a pistol and unalived himself. Inside Crawford's residence, investigators found a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil. The network had protected Crawford for 4 decades, and Crawford had closely monitored the journalist who exposed the cult. The violence that came from the cult hierarchy didn't end with the arrest of Berkowitz or the things that happened to the compromised members. The group produced snuff films and did contract killings for the elite. On the night of October 31st, 1981, Halloween, 39-year-old freelance photographer Ronald Seisman and a 20-year-old Smith College student named Elizabeth Platzman were murdered inside a Seisman's apartment in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. Both victims were severely beaten before being executed with gunshots to the head. The apartment was ransacked, showing that there was a search for some sort of item. Law enforcement initially speculated that that double homicide was drug-related. Berkowitz, who was again in jail at the time, provided intelligence regarding the Halloween execution. He informed authorities that Seisman had acquired a snuff film produced by the Satanic Network. The cult dispatched assassins to the Chelsea apartment to retrieve the footage and eliminate the liability. The way that the network operated was exposed 2 years later during the high-profile assassination of Roy Radin. Radin was a 33-year-old vaudeville promoter and millionaire, and he was attempting to break into the film industry by financing the Cotton Club, a major motion picture involving Hollywood producer Robert Evans. Radin was introduced to Evans by a drug trafficker named Karen Greenberger. After Radin refused to pay Greenberger a $50,000 finder's fee, a contract was issued on Radin's life. On May 13, 1983, Radin vanished while on his way to a conference in Beverly Hills. Weeks later, a beekeeper and a forest ranger discovered his remains in a canyon near Gorman, California, 65 miles north of Los Angeles. Radin had been shot multiple times in the head and his face had been obliterated by dynamite to stop dental identification, or visual identification, I guess. Besides his corpse was a King James Bible, open to a verse from the book of Isaiah. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. The contract killer convicted of executing Radin was a man named William Mentzer. Law enforcement and investigative journalists linked Mentzer directly to the Manson family and the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Mentzer operated as an enforcer for the exact syndicate that commanded the Yonkers cell. Maury Terry would discover that Radin himself was deeply involved in the occult, potentially serving as a financial backer or regional leader for the cult's operations in the New York metropolitan area. The original police files show a clean, resolved timeline. A deranged postal worker who worked alone was commanded by a dog, killing 6 people and wounding 7 others with a .44 caliber revolver. The NYPD locked the cell door on David Berkowitz in August 1977 and refused to look anywhere else. The facts suggest that this is not a closed case. A single person doesn't have short dark hair and straight blonde hair. A single .44 caliber revolver can't shoot bullets in 2 burrows simultaneously without a network to transport it. A delusional postal worker in New York does not know the exact motive behind the ritualistic execution of a 19-year-old woman in a Stanford University church unless he is connected to the individuals who were involved in the murder. John Carr's face was blown off by a rifle shot in North Dakota. Michael Carr crashed into a concrete of the West Side Highway. Stephen Crawford put a gun to his own head in San Jose while reading a book about the exact cult he served. Rory Radin's face was erased with dynamite in a California canyon by an enforcer tied to Charles Manson. The blood in the dirt was never washed away. The network simply relocated, abandoning their pawns in prison and eliminating the weak links while law enforcement celebrated the capture of a single man. Please stay spooky.